Okay, we're looking at landscape archaeology part 2, and we're going to be looking a little bit more in detail about aerial photography. And last week I introduced the subject of landscape archaeology, and we ended up looking a little bit in the direction of aerial photography. And all the images that I set up to do aerial photography last week, I've done a completely new set this week because it's very much relevant to the text I've got in front of me. So aerial photography, like all the elements that we will be looking at, are really, really relevant to try and get a grip on our landscape. I remember mentioning last week things like field survey, field walking, radiocarbon dating, excavation. And aerial photography is one of those areas of archaeology that has been really big for a number of years. You know, geophys has come in over the past 30 odd years, but people have been looking at aerial photographs even since the Victorian period, even before the invention of planes. I mentioned last week about hot air balloons flying above landscapes like the Wiltshire Plains and flying above Stonehenge in 1906. We had some really good images before the invention of planes. There's 4 boxes on the screen, and we'll explain what these mean in detail. Actually, the word shadow marks, what does that mean? Just quickly, if you're flying above a landscape, a bank might form a shadow, revealing a hill fort, for example, or the bank associated with a medieval village, or a hollow lane, or a Roman fort, and so on and so on. Soil marks, well, soil marks are the very awkward one today, actually, because we've got a few images about soil marks, but not as many images that we have associated with crop marks, which is a completely different thing. Soil marks is when there's no crop on the field, you've just got the soil. And in contrast in the soil, you see various indications of banks and ditches and buildings. And crop marks are definitely that, where in different areas of the field, the crop might grow tall above a ditch and might grow shallow above a wall. We've all heard of the parable of the good sower, something I learned in infant school. And this very much comes in when we're trying to work out crop marks, for example, positive and negative crop marks. So a negative crop mark is where the crop grows very lightly on the wall, and a positive crop mark is where it grows very high on top of a ditch, as you can see. The parable of the good sower is based on you throw your grain into a field, and some of the grain falls on the wall and it doesn't grow very high. Other grain falls onto where there was once a ditch and it's very moist, and the crop grows very tall. So that's very useful here today. So we've got lots of images, and those images very much help us understand 3 areas of aerial photography, and we're going to go straight into it. So here we go. Now, I don't know if any of you have been to Penally in West Wales, but you might be aware, and I've done a whole video on this, that there's a First World War trench system. And you'll be forgiven for asking the question, why is there a First World War trench system in West Wales? I thought the First World War actually took place in France and in Russia and other parts of the European landscape. And actually, this was a practice range, and it comes up really well through using aerial photography. And these earthworks that you can see in front of you are to be worked out very keenly on the ground, but trying to figure out what's going on is very difficult. So you need an aerial photograph to really understand this practice trench network from the First World War. But I'm not going to do is look too much into the histories of these sites. This is just an academic look at aerial photography. So that's what I completely wish to do tonight. So some of you know where this site is, but I will explain for those that don't, but not yet. So what we primarily look at is aerial photography in a British context, because aerial photography across the world has different meanings, different uses. Aerial photographs from different parts of the world are read differently. If you're doing aerial photography, for example, in Cyprus, you're going to look at soil marks because the landscape in Cyprus can be very arid and lots of the time crops are not growing. So by looking at those soil marks, you're able to understand structures. But in Britain, crop marks where crops are actually growing, we're finding quite a large number of archaeological sites that have never been known about until now. Aerial photography is particularly well developed in landscape archaeology in Britain, and the issues and methods apply equally to other regions of the world, as I've demonstrated. Aerial photography, aerial reconnaissance, as it's called by some posher archaeologists, has the potential to be a uniquely powerful technique for the discovery and identification of buried archaeological remains across the landscape. So over the past 80 years, it has resulted in a recognition of literally hundreds of thousands of archaeological monuments and land features. And what we mean, we all know what an archaeological monument is. So a land feature is where watercourses may have moved, and you've got oxbow lakes and sort of, there are other changes within the landscape that are natural, but those natural changes within the landscape naturally affect the archaeological components. This site in front of you, some of you will be aware, is the archaeological excavation at Trelli. And this is an aerial view of the archaeology after it's been revealed. But if I looked a little bit deeper into the annals, I might be able to find an aerial view of this landscape before 2006, before the archaeological excavations. And that aerial view might show some humps and bumps and might indicate, let's get my little pointing tools on here, might indicate there it is, the well. But certainly from aerial photography, the walls would be indicated. And in many ways, aerial photography complements what's going on the ground. And next week, what we will look at is field walking, field survey. I feel that field survey is also underrated in archaeology. Archaeological sites, as the one demonstrated here, can no longer be seen in isolation, but as components of a far larger ancient landscape, which can only ever be partially excavated or preserved. So, you know, we're working on this site now, and if we work on this site at the level we're working, it'll probably take about another 2,000 years to just do a few square meters. But by using aerial photography, Stuart Wilson can really understand the landscape and understand the plan of the landscape without having to excavate all of it. He will never own the whole village of Trelli. It's not possible. But he can take aerial views of the landscape to link the buildings that he's seeing in with the buildings that we're excavating. This is why aerial photography is so important when you look at the wider landscape. Given the obvious need for a change in approach to the investigation of what we're seeing on the ground, we look towards aerial photography. But even when we're thinking of aerial photography, archaeologists are still, in some quarters, obsessed with archaeological excavation. And it misses the wider picture that can be given to us from aerial photography. So the single site approach is not the way to look at things. You know, I always get asked at this site, where are all the roads? what is the relationship with this, with mining, and all these other little questions I get asked. But obviously, aerial photography, you could say, see on an aerial photograph, this is there, and people know where you are. It's great. But it's very difficult to know where you are on the ground when you're trying to explain things. Where's north, where's south, where's the well, and all these other things. So this is why aerial photography is so, so important. I don't know if I told you, years ago, there was a chap, and this chap was, I'm just going to make sure I missed an image there. This chap was had 45 minutes a week to go flying in a little biplane, and he said, right, if you give me 40 quid, I will take you up for 45 minutes, and if you've got a camera, you can photograph the Vale of Glamorgan. It was great. So I was up there photographing, sort of out the window of the Vale of Glamorgan. It was great. And I don't know if we ever found any sites back then, but this was a long time ago. And it's so great to be able to look at the landscape from the air. This site is very familiar to me. This is a site known as Old Sarum. And Old Sarum is near Salisbury. It was going to be the place where Salisbury was, but unfortunately, Old Sarum, because of the Iron Age bank and ditch around the outside, it was such a small site that they couldn't put all the houses and buildings in there. So they said, oh, let's move elsewhere. And you can get an idea on the ground. It's very difficult to understand how restricted the site is. But from above, you can clearly see there's a cathedral, which is down hither. And when you take into account the castle in the middle, and when you take into account all the little boundaries, you start, and the entrances into this site, you start to see that there's not a lot of room. And if people who had thought of making this a city back in the day had thought, oh, actually, we've got an aerial photograph, we're not going to be able to do it, they may have actually thought twice, and this would never have had the castle or the cathedral, and so on and so on and so on. So in hindsight, we understand why they abandoned this site and actually had Salisbury itself as the city and not this locality. So lots of, I would like to go in a little bit of a direction, okay? And that direction I'd like to go at is by looking at a few interesting images, which is what we're going to do now. So when we think about aerial photography, we might think about Causeway Enclosures. We might think about Cursus Monuments, Long Barrows, Mortuary, all these different words and so on. But on the ground, when you're trying to understand what's going on, it's always good to have an aerial photograph. And these are round barrows from the Bronze Age. And this is a bit of an oblique image, looking at the archaeology. It's a sort of a bit of oblique image because it's an angle, but you can actually clearly see the barrows in that field, the Bronze Age barrows. So what I've decided to do is sort of is take on this list. So some things on the ground are very difficult to work out. So this image in front actually shows what's known as a Cursus Monument. And can I just make a comment a minute? I'm actually very aware that I'm missing some of my images. So if you could bear with me a minute, I'm just going to see what has gone wrong. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. I do actually have a few images missing, actually, which is a bit of a shame. But hang on a minute. I'm just going to go back in a minute. Sometimes when you set up a lecture and you add different slides in, you can miss one or two. So I'm just gonna right, that's the one I wanted actually. So new share, bingo. Get this in context. Good. Right, okay. So when we're looking at a landscape, to understand what's on the ground, again, the aerial photography, this is actually known as a Causeway Enclosure. This is a site called Windmill Hill. And none of you, other than Bill, has actually been to the Windmill Hill site with me. And you get very excited when you read the name Windmill Hill, because it's the site when you're thinking about the Neolithic period in regards to Causeway Enclosures. I'd like to tell you what all these sites mean, but it's just trying to find the time. Basically, in short, a Causeway Enclosure it starts off with a concentric interbitten ditches. So you have a ditch, causeway, ditch, causeway, ditch, causeway. In a circle, concentric circle that we see there, that's a causeway enclosure. And then what they would do, as more people moved into the area, you'd have another causeway enclosure, and then you'd have another causeway enclosure. And if you briefly look at this, it's not really shown perfectly. You can see a ditch, and you can see a causeway or a raised area, a ditch, a causeway, and this is what causeway enclosure is. So the point is, when you go to a site like this, you think, wow, you know, I'm really going to be able to see the causeway enclosure site. And you can't see hardly anything on the ground. You wander across the field and you can't see where any of those things are with the red arrows. You can't make anything out. And again, this is why it's good to have an aerial photograph of the landscape to really understand what's going on there. I don't know, Jessica or Mena, have you ever actually been to Windmill Hill?
No.
No, I haven't.
It's near Avebury, and it's a very interesting site indeed. It's the site that the textbooks tell you to go to, but when you go there, you can't hardly see anything. And even the barrows. So this is the Neolithic period, so we're looking at 5,000 years ago, and then the barrows themselves take us to roughly around 3,500 years ago. And they were actually placed onto the site, so you can see the barrows, but you can't see the Causeway Enclosure, which is why lots of people go to this site, which is naturally a little bit disappointing. So moving on again. And there is something going wrong with my images today. So let's go back to where we were. And apologies for this, folks. And we'll just look at that again. And the next image that we look at is known as a Cursus Monument, as it comes up on the screen. And brilliant. Are you seeing an image on your screen?
Not yet.
Okay. Now this, okay, let's just see if you can see this one. Right. Now this is actually a Cursus Monument. And what a Cursus Monument is, it's a banked and ditched enclosure. So if I, hang on a minute, there's something really going wrong with my images today. Hang on a minute. I really apologize for this. Hang on a minute. There's something going wrong. Hang on. I'll just see if I can get this back up on the screen. Right. So let's just go back there. So there's not just something going on wrong with Bill. There's something going wrong with my images. So let's just see if I can get this up there. This was only supposed to be a short little bit. So let's see if we can get this up there. Right, are you seeing what a Cursus Monument looks like on your screen now?
No.
No.
Oh, flipping heck. God almighty. What about now?
Yeah, now I can.
Right, this is known as a Cursus Monument. They were built in the Neolithic period about 6,000 to about 5,500 years ago. But on the ground today, they're very difficult to make out. And you can only really work out Cursus monuments from above. They're these huge Neolithic monuments that stretch over the landscape. But monuments that you can really see on the ground and actually through aerial photography are long barrows. Neolithic long barrows like this one. This is an example at West Kennet Long Barrow, and I love this site. So again, the aerial photography as not a supplement, but an addition to what you're seeing on the ground. But usually, when we're looking at trying to understand sites using aerial photography, we usually understand these sites that have been ploughed out of all recognition. And the only evidence that we've got is trying to understand them from above. More Bronze Age barrows. And again, these Bronze Age barrows are very clear on the ground. But in lots of places, these Bronze Age barrows have been ploughed out of all recognition. You can't recognize them. They've been flattened. And by flying above them using aerial photography, you can really understand what you have on the ground. Again, this type of landscape, more of these barrows. When you're passing this type of landscape in Lincolnshire, you can jump out your car and see there's a clump of trees over there, and you can go a bit further on, you can see another clump of trees. And you might go across the crop and you might actually go to these and not really understand what they're about. But again, another demonstration in Lincolnshire, what you can really understand through aerial photography. This is what I was talking about a few moments ago. This is using aerial photography to look down at the landscape and to understand sites that have been completely ploughed out of all recognition. This is a site known as Darumham in Hampshire, in the south again. And this site itself, as you fly above, you can work out the crop marks. So what you can clearly see with this, if we want, so the light staining is the negative image, and the green staining is the positive image. Now that's very strange. What the interpretation could be here is that in the past, as they dug out the ground, they revealed stone, and that stone itself was then placed in the ditches around these barrows, making them very hardy. So when crops are growing, the crops are growing quite stunted. There's various different ways of interpreting aerial photographs, but in most places, when the ground is being disturbed, it would be the reverse. The ditch itself would have a positive image. In fact, it would grow lush green, and the inside would grow a paler green. So you've got a positive image in the ditch, which is growing much more brighter green, and around the outside is a negative image where it's lighter green. But in this instance, in Hampshire, it's the other way around. Archaeology can have that sense of contrast, that sense of differences. And that's what we're trying to do today, to give you an idea of differences in archaeology. Over the recent few decades, many new archaeological sites have been found. And I don't know if you can see it, but this is actually an example in Ireland. At Newgrange in Ireland, what they say they find and the interpretation on the ground is I can show you now. You could just see pale outlines of some kind of a ditch. This to me looked very much like a Causeway Enclosure, but I'm told that this is actually a henge monument from Newgrange in Ireland, associated with the great monuments at Newgrange in Ireland, which I know Anne has actually visited. This itself, again, is another demonstration of crop marks, giving you just a little bit of information. And as we will discuss, we will discuss the very reality that if you've got the right lighting conditions, you can find many things. If you don't have the right lighting conditions, it's unlikely you're going to see anything. I don't know if any of you have actually been to this. Now, we've mentioned about crop marks, we've mentioned about soil marks. We'll go into a lot more detail in a few moments. But this is the banked and ditched enclosure, otherwise known as a hill fort, Maiden Castle. So this is very clear. This is an oblique angle rather than a vertical angle photograph. And this is a site from the Roman and medieval period. And again, I'm just sort of giving you a little bit of an overview again. And what you are clearly seeing with this Roman site is a multifaceted site that you've got the wall and the earthwork. You've actually got the ditch. You've got the Tommen, or the mound itself. This was placed in after the Roman period, probably around the 1000s by a local prince. And then what you do see is a modern wall. So you've got a Roman site, a medieval site, and you've got a modern wall, a multifaceted landscape, as you see through the aerial photography tonight. And again, looking at that. Now, I'm not going to quiz anybody, but this is actually very near Cardiff. This is a Roman villa near Cardiff. It's to be found in some playing fields. This
is that the Ely one?
That's the Ely Roman villa, yeah. There it is. That's the Ely Roman villa. The villa itself is the rough stuff in the middle. That's the back wing, that's the side wing, and that's another wing. That's the Roman villa at Ely. And again, it's very difficult to make out on the ground. Actually, the only sign that there's a villa at Ely is that what they've done, they've let the grass overgrow and there's brambles and stuff there. And they've done that to stop people metal detecting on the side. But that there is the Roman villa. Yeah, you are right. That is Ely. Again, the wonders of aerial photography. In isolating individual features for study, they are removed from their local context. So we've looked at a few examples of individual sites. And what you've got to do, you've got to link all those little sites within the landscape. So in other words, what we're talking about, you can't have Stonehenge on its own. You've got to add the Cursus Monument with it. And you've got to add the avenue with it as well. And you've got to add the barrows with it. And you've got to have this great diverse landscape. It's not a good thing to sort of try and understand these sites on their own, because archaeology doesn't exist alone. It's a multifaceted landscape. It's a landscape of tarscapes, as Dr. Ingold would state, as we mentioned last week. And obviously, every detail is important. The relationship of features within the landscape, whatever kind they are. If we are interested in the totality of the landscape, we've got to really put every feature when we're trying to understand the landscape onto the map. An aerial photograph shouldn't just be seen alone. It should be understood. Now, these are rather interesting images. This shows the two clear types of aerial photograph. There's another type of aerial photograph. It's known as Lidar, but we're not doing that today. Lidar is when you use thermal imagery to sort of, when you're flying above a landscape, that imagery cuts through the trees and you're able to read the landscape a lot better. But this itself shows a vertical photograph. So the vertical photographs are the best. When you're looking at soil definitions, when you're trying to look, for example, at soil marks. Crop marks are really well understood when you're using vertical photographs. But if you're trying to understand earthworks, oblique photographs at an angle are usually the best way of looking at it, because in different lights, you can take a photograph and it helps you understand definitions of banks and ditches in a field. And that's really important. So you've got the two techniques there. Vertical photography for crop and soil marks, and oblique photography for earthworks. You can also use vertical photography for earthworks as well. And that's understood there. Oblique aerial photography involves taking a photograph from lower altitudes, as it said, at an angle. This gives a better perspective and pictorial effect and allows for identification of earthworks. Vertical, as we said, involves taking a photograph from greater heights. And that gives you an idea, as we've said, of the landscape, the spatial relationship of the landscape. This gives a bird's eye view of an area, allowing for easier map marking and identification of crop marks. So in other words, vertical photography helps you map the landscape. Now, here we go. Archaeological visibility. Archaeological features appear on aerial photographs in three main forms: as crop marks, as in this illustration. This was actually published this year. An aerial view of a Roman fort dating back 2,000 years was found in North Yorkshire. Crop marks sites occur when crops grow over buried features, develop at a different rate from those growing next to them. We'll look at a great deal more detail. But these sites are being found now. You know, there's so many archaeological sites out there that are being found now afresh. New time signs, sites that haven't been found on the ground. Because unfortunately, archaeologists don't have all the time in the world to field walk every field. And unfortunately, when a field has got a crop on it or there's grass on it, you're really not going to find artifacts. And a farmer's not going to want you wandering across his field, destroying his crops. And there's all permissions and all the rest of it. So aerial photography, you instantly find and recognize archaeological sites. This itself is the soil mark aerial photography. So what we do find in large landscapes like Lincolnshire, you find that they plough large tracts of land. And this is rather interesting because what you can see on this map itself, these are actually soil marks. There's no crop growing in the field. And due to the soil definition, you can clearly see two structures there, 1, 2. And this looks like a sunken lane and another field boundary. And actually there is something else that's recognizable. These ridge and furrow marks. What's basically happened? The ridge and furrow, these ridge and furrows would have been about 1 meter in height at a point in time, and they would have been quite tall standing structures in a field. They've been leveled, but when the earthworks have been leveled, the soil ends up filling the ditches and give it a different definition in regards to the surrounding landscape. Moving on again. And obviously the more familiar form of aerial photograph is going to come up. It's this one. You know, the typical earthwork aerial photography, you know, the typical thing that you see in books. Anne's written up there, crop marks have been much more evident due to the hot weather, so revealing lots of work for archaeologists to do. And you're very right. So many more sites come up in really hot weather because what happens is because you've got a parched landscape, the crop ripens quicker. However, when you get crops growing above a ditch, it's still got access to moisture, so they grow really tall. Great definition. One site that really stands out when you try to understand you know, the medieval period, a deserted medieval villages, and that's exactly what this is. Archaeological sites which have been leveled by cultivation. This hasn't been. The previous one has, where you see the soil marks present more complex problems and are by far the most common features in the predominantly arable farming land of lowland Britain and, in many respects, Europe. Unlike earthworks, these show only as marks in bare soil or as variations in crop development. The factors responsible for their formation are complex and often unpredictable and require evaluation in order to understand how reliable they are as a sample of the surviving archaeological record. To assess the density and distribution of crop and soil marks, it is important to study the geographical factors affecting their visibility and to propose practical approaches to account for them. So saying that archaeological visibility in the landscape is giving you a sense of importance. It's very important. So I don't know, other than reading what it says at the top of the screen, do either Mena or Jessica recognize this archaeological landscape using aerial photography, the earthwork technique, using the oblique angle photography? Where is this site? Okay, give up. This is a site known as Warren Percy in North Yorkshire. This is a key medieval deserted site, deserted medieval village. This has been extensively excavated in the 1950s, but you can clearly understand the site from above. Do you know what? When I've examined this site and people give you photographs and they say, "Oh, right, this is a photograph of the remains of the manor house," and so on. You think, well, where is this? But what you can easily do using an aerial photograph is say, these here are the villagers' houses. And if I can remember right, that's the remains of the church and that's the remains of the manor house. You can clearly see this with the aerial photography, but what you can't do is understand this on the ground as well as an aerial photograph can tell you. An interesting point, if we just go back to that image again, an interesting point is that obviously the deserted medieval village actually is in this field as well, and is in this field and is under the trees. But due to intense farming, you're not going to be able to understand the deserted medieval village in the other field using the oblique photographic method. You've got to use the vertical method, and there's nothing showing in the other field, but I bet you there is if you use the vertical photographic method to understand what's going on associated with the North Yorkshire village of Warren Percy. Understanding earthworks, deserted medieval village well attested in Britain, may in theory be photographed at any time. Now look at that, isn't that great? You've got the sunken hollow of the village, which is here. So you've got the sunken hollow. Let's go down the sunken hollow all the way through the village. And then what you have a moated site. So that would probably indicate a manor house. And what you have is the ridge and furrow systems in the field. This is directly flush with the village. And this runs in the same direction as the road or the sunken hollow. And you're looking at different boundaries and faint traces of other buildings in the village. Again, deserted medieval village. But so in theory, these landscapes can be photographed at any time, but are most effectively recorded in winter when covering vegetation is low and topographical features are thrown into high relief by long shadows. You can see that the hollow is actually quite dark there. That's because it's shown up by a shadow. And in the fields, you can actually make out, that's really demonstrated there. You can work out that you've got the bank and you've got the ditch. Wonderful, you can see it because of the shadow. You wouldn't be able to get that definition with flying above the landscape using a vertical image in the height of the sun. And another site that has brilliant ridge and furrows that can actually be seen through aerial photography, but on the ground as well, is a site known as Castlerig in Cumbria. If survey is sufficiently thorough and overlying vegetation not too thick, then the total surviving record of such features should eventually be recorded, which if you did this on the ground with a theodolite, or you did this with a tape measure on the ground, it could take you day after day after day. An aerial photograph, bang, it's done. It's done in one photograph. And that saves you a lot of work. That's if you can get out and hire a plane. That's always the difficulty. Okay, how is this sounding so far, Mena?
Good. Oh, hang on.
Cool. Is it coming across clear, Jessica?
Yeah, sorry, my internet connection went, so I've just spent the last 5 minutes trying to connect.
You've missed all the good stuff.
I know.
But the thing is, this is being recorded, so you know. And it's a shame Bill left us, because there's a lot of verbalization here today. So what I would like to do next is look at crop marks, but this is a rather interesting one. These are actually soil marks, but this is an aerial photo. This is cheating, actually. This is an aerial photograph of an archaeological excavation. Cambridge aerial view of the abandoned medieval village at Horton. And this is part of the infrastructure for a new road building project. And this itself is an area that's been completely cleared. They've taken the topsoil off, and now you've got a ground plan. And that itself has all been excavated by archaeologists. But you get a complete aerial view, soil marks. But when we're talking about soil marks, we're usually talking about in relation to a landscape that's been ploughed. But then again, the soil marks come up really well in indicating this extensive medieval village landscape. So basically, here we go. Crop marks, or geological or archaeological origin, to show growth differences must be sharply developed within a particular crop. To understand the vagaries of crop mark formation, it is important to note the factors which affect crop growth. Nationally, regionally, topographically, various different variations, climate, all these different things affect how to find crop marks and also how to understand crop marks. Now, this is in complete contrast to that image that we saw earlier on, where on the one earlier on, it showed the ditches in lighter contrast to the surrounding landscape. But this time, what we do see is the ditches themselves are dark. A roundhouse. This could be actually a corral area, but I hasten to add that looks a bit of like a roundhouse, the outline of a roundhouse, and the entranceway, an entrance corral leading into the roundhouse. And then what we've got a ditch around the outside. And this looks really in fine definition against the landscape. A really good crop mark. Temperatures is a major factor in crop development, but is rarely responsible for measurable differences at field scale. These variations are most commonly due to varying supplies of available soil moisture, not necessarily to do with temperature. And soil moisture can be stored in the soil, stored in ditches, stored in different types of soil. And what's under the ground, if there's a big thick clay layer under the ground, the water may store in the ground a lot longer, giving you much higher growing crops. But if there's a ditch there, then you have a substantial ditch that has a great deal of moisture in it, giving you substantially larger growing crops. So you've got water holding capacity of the soil, available of groundwater and evaporation. When potential transpiration exceeds waterfall, the difference is called potential soil moisture deficit. So the surrounding soil has a soil moisture deficit, an SMD, and the ditch doesn't. So what we find across Britain is various differences in crop growth. And it's very much to do with erosion and various other things as well. Another image coming up. So this is the process. If we want to zoom in a little bit louder there, and we go, you're gonna let me do this? No, it's not going to let me enlarge. So what you do see, this is quite a simple principle. So the crop, it's, there's the same level of seed planted across this barley crop. It's the same level of seed, interspaced, it's fine, right? It's plowed in the right direction. There's enough seed in every single furrow. It's all fine. But what happens is, as there's a deficit in storage of water in the ground above the wall, then the crop above the wall has a clear stunted growth, as you can see. But above the ditch, that there's more growth. And then what you do see is that when there's nothing going on in the field, when there's no building walls, the crop grows at the mean average. This is what we usually see. But again, geology can actually affect the mean average across the field. It's not just about archaeology. So say there's a heavy clay over here, and there's an alluvial stretch on one side, which is all natural. The crop in the alluvial ditch will grow much higher than on the clay layer. So that's all natural. So obviously understanding this landscape. And who's got their radio on? Somebody's got their radio on.
Not me.
Have you got your radio on, Mena?
No, I'm literally sat in silence.
I'm just going to see who's been very naughty and put their radio on. Oh, right. It doesn't seem to be anybody else. Okay, fair enough. Okay, let's move on again. Let's put you there. Good. On the side. Good. Excellent. So, again, this is another indication of a crop mark. This was taken very recently. And this site itself, as you can see from the caption, these crop marks show a known Cursus Monument at Warborough, Oxfordshire. We mentioned Cursus Monuments. The purpose of the Cursus Monument is debated. Thought to be an enclosure, basically a processional way, but the interpretation of a Cursus Monument, and they're very few in the country. We only know about 30 examples of Cursus Monuments in the Neolithic period. And what they simply are is a bank that runs parallel to another bank. So the distance between the two banks may be 10, 20 meters. And then at the terminals, they meet with another bank between them. And that's basically what a Cursus Monument is. And there's usually never any entrances or exits into them. And some archaeologists believe that they're the landscape of the ancestors. So obviously, there you go, a nice Cursus monument there. And again, showing you another crop marks are caused by underlying archaeology. There you go. On the left again, best growth over covered ditch, and crop growth reduced over buried stone wall. And there you can see. Usually what happens is farmers, if they know there's a wall there, over time they will usually try to plough out the wall. But unfortunately, it makes things worse, because if you plough out a wall, the stone is spread throughout the field, causes problems with other crops growing in the field. So, it's not always the way out. Just leave the wall there. Again, this is a really intriguing site in Worcestershire, late Iron Age Roman period. What we do find is that Roman villas come up really well when you're taking aerial photographs. And the one that I would be familiar with you would be the one that I showed last week at Lantwick Major, Kai and Mead. And look at these. Again, more of these wonderful crop marks. And again, what you can see here is an Iron Age and Bronze Age landscape, a landscape of various burials. What we do see in the Iron Age, they experimented with square barrows. And again, this is a burial landscape. What's happened is over time, all of these barrows have been flattened. So what's happened is that the ditch around the outside that created the mound, all the soil has actually filled into them. And on the ground, there's absolutely nothing. You can't see any of this on the ground. There's no indication of this on the ground at all. But through aerial photography, you can clearly see this landscape. And what is interesting is you can also see some geological features as well. You can see that there are dried up streams. And there's almost as if there's some kind of weird enclosure ditches across this landscape as well. And what are these over here? Are these geological? Might be. Again, it's an archaeological geological landscape that we actually see when we're looking at these aerial photographs. Now, the last area to basically look at today, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what I'm hoping to do next week, and then the issue with the maps. Soil marks. Soil marks appear on photographs of sharp tonal changes due to differences in surface color and reflection. So you can just see a little bit of grass growing on there. But the soil mark is basically what it is, a soil mark. And as long as the soil is really showing, you can have little bits of grass growing across it. But what happens is that, say for example, it's a very rich loamy landscape, so it would be browny soil, a light browny soil. A loamy landscape would be half sand, half clay, and a half organic material, okay? And chucking a few sort of bits of gravel and so on. A really good mixed soil. And that might come out as like a nice sort of pale browny color, or in other parts of the world, a grey color. And obviously that would tell you if it's alkaline or acidic or neutral soil, but that's another lecture. And that they're showing there would come up much darker than the surrounding soil. And that would be your soil mark. And that's exactly what we're looking at. And usually what you do see in Wiltshire, the ground itself is like a paley off grey-white colour. And when you dig into the soil below, the natural sort of regolithic, very light rocks there, the chalky landscape is perfectly white. So what you would do is, in the past, they would dig this out, right? And then over time, as the landscape was ploughed, that sort of white, chalky colour, that the sort of everything would go back into the ditch. And that would be lighter than the surrounding landscape. So you've got these different contrasts, and in different regions of the country, there are different rules. Look at that there. That is a rather interesting one. So what's happened is, as opposed to what I've explained, here there's a ditch being dug. So this would be a boundary ditch. This is a ditch profile, a place called Merton Rise. And what they've done here, they've dug out a V-shaped ditch. And this may have been a great agricultural landscape, but over time, because of erosion and depletion of the soil quality, and then the ditch is no longer required. So over time, they've been ploughing, and all what's left of the rich soil ends up in the ditch. Hence why the ditch is darker than the surrounding landscape. Different rules, different parts of the country. And look at this. This is a soil mark at Basingstoke. So they occur on many soil types, but appear most commonly on soils that are very reflective, such as chalk, where the underlying subsoil contrasts enough to be visible when ploughed to the surface. For soil marks to appear to the naked eye, it is necessary for the topsoil and the subsoil to have significantly different tonal properties and to be close enough to the surface to be exposed by ploughing. Soil marks rarely appear on clays as the soil and archaeological features show little contrast. However, soil marks can still form on these soils if the archaeological material being ploughed to the surface are themselves sufficiently distinctive. But before we talk about that, let's talk about this. So Basingstoke, again, what they've got, this would typically be called a Banjo Enclosure. And what a Banjo Enclosure is quite clear. You've got this sort of weird circular thing here. And then what you've got is there would be two parallel fences, a little shallow ditch leading into the Banjo Enclosure, and hence the name of Banjo Enclosure. So we find lots of these across the landscape. Again, a mixed landscape, because what you do find on this image, you find these weird little features that might actually be earlier than this feature. Usually, if the features in the landscape are fainter than in contrast to the darker definitions, the tonal colors in the soil, it's likely that they are more recent than the earlier, lighter, very faint earthworks indicated in these soil marks. I use the word earthworks, you know, settlements and structures within the landscape. Again, moving on. A little bit of homework, actually, which is coming up, if this changes. And look at this one. You can hardly see anything. This is a rather interesting image, because this is actually, there are actually 3 barrows there. You've got 1, 2, 3. Now, these barrows are almost gone. There's barrows in the Vale of Glamorgan near Mark Cross, which I keep pointing out to people when we do the walks at the Power and Harrow. And I say, over there, 50 years ago, there were barrows, but because they've been ploughed out, I haven't really seen them through aerial photography. But you might actually see them as soil marks. Because what happens, because the archaeological monuments have been so damaged, even crop marks don't reveal the secrets of the landscape, but just faint changes in the soil color still reveal the soil marks of these 3 Bronze Age monuments. And then what we do have, look at this. And what I'm just making sure is that I've got my last images. There we go. I'm just making sure that they're all there. I do apologize at the beginning. I don't know what happened to my images. It's really flowed well since. Again, look at that Roman site there, that wonderful Roman villa site. Again, that comes up absolutely perfectly in contrast to the surrounding landscape in that very field. Again, thanks to these soil marks. Reading an example of soil marks, we've already looked at this one. And earlier on, we mentioned that what we do find is that we find these little structures, and we find this almost hollow way that can't be seen on the ground anymore, but can be seen looking at soil marks. And what I would like to do is go to here and go to these 2 images last. This itself, this is your homework. I would like you to go online and try to find Gallo-Roman villas in the area of the Somme. And the classic examples of soil marks can be seen in the ploughing up of the chalk wall foundations of Gallo-Roman villas at the Somme in France. In Britain, this is a relatively rare occurrence, and plotting potential soil marks visibility is more a matter of understanding tonal contrast between plough soils and underlying horizons and overall soil depths. So what we've done there, we've more or less come to the end now of looking at aerial photography. But again, I'd like to just show you this, you can imagine in the past, you've got this Iron Age settlement. They've got a nice ditch. You've got a bank and a palisade. But as the years go by, this is very difficult to understand on the ground. But by using the vertical aerial photography, you could take photographs of the ground and actually see probably maybe August time, just before they harvest the crop. The crop in this area is going to be growing quite stunted, and the crop in this area is going to be growing much higher. And then the surrounding landscape is going to be growing between the stunted crop and the crop that actually grows above the ditch. And obviously over the next year or so, when you actually look at articles from local newspapers and national newspapers, you can usually see that new finds are being made. And new finds are not just being made in the summer months, but in the winter months as well. When you fly above the landscape, snow gathers in hollows. And then those hollows look darker than the surrounding white landscape, even though the snow has actually fallen across the landscape on an average level. Snow gathers in those ditches, and you can see them in clear definition with the other features within the landscape. Again, this is that Gallo Roman villa, and what you can see, just quickly. Oh, it's playing up. You can actually see the main building, and you can actually see the aisles going off it. A Roman villa in France at the Somme, and obviously look at those soil marks, and you'll also see loads of trench systems as well. The trench systems were actually filled in almost immediately after the 11th hour of the 11th month in 1918. So they were filled in, but then you can see the soil differentiation through aerial photographs as well. Look at this little one, this final image. Scorch marks reveal the buried foundations of a hall at Staffordshire. Tixall Hall. This was built in 1555, but all that's left of the hall is this part of the building. And scorch marks, basically crop marks, but basically it's just another word for it. So look out for your aerial photographic notices in the newspaper. And next week, two things to tell you. So next week, we're going to be looking at field walking, field survey. It's going to be a little bit more intense. But in the meanwhile, I'd like you to all order one of these Ordnance Survey Explorer maps of any area in the country. And they need to be 1 to 25,000 scale, basically 4 inches to 1 kilometre. The old 2-inch maps, that's what they used to call them, 2 inches to 1 mile maps. And then next week, I will tell you exactly what we're going to do with these maps, because in the following week, the 4th week, will be map reading and trying to understand maps in an archaeological context. So let's see if there's any questions. So Bill didn't come back and join us. So anything you would like to say, Mena?
I really enjoyed everything.
Good. You don't have to say you really enjoy it every week, but, you know.
I mean, I did, yeah, it was interesting.
Good. But it's good to have an endorsement. What about you, Jessica?
It was a good lecture, yeah. Interesting.
Good. And now what we're going to get is Margaret being really upset with the fact that I didn't show her a photograph of John on the excavations at Trelli. Hang on, Margaret, I'm trying to unmute you. You've got to unmute yourself, Margaret. So as you're unmuting yourself, Margaret, anything you'd like to say, Ellen?
Oh, no, it was lovely. The photographs are really good. They're lovely, yeah.
And I do like the one behind me. It's great, isn't it? Right, Margaret, go on, you spit.
The one at Basingstoke, is that on Watership Down?
Now that's going to be your homework.
Okay. Because I live just below it, and I think I know where it was. We used to live there.
I tell you what I'll do, Anne, as you're asking your questions or anything, right? Just I will find this image. Go on, Anne, talk.
Oh, no, I enjoyed that. It's very interesting. Yeah, just obviously we're seeing much more now that we've had this amazing weather. But obviously, you know, in the last 10 years, really.
And to be honest with you, in the last 10 years and for a very long time, we've got so much that is being seen through aerial photography. And, you know, it's really being recognized even more now as a major tool to archaeologists. To be honest with you, I don't like criticizing Time Team because I'm a great fan of Time Team. But in many ways, I don't think they made enough of aerial photography in Time Team. I don't think they did.
No.
No, I think they just used, well, I don't know who gave them permission to do the dig, you know, but they've obviously applied to do it, you know, they found some marks somewhere and
Obviously,
oh no, it's maps. They use maps, didn't they? A lot.
Yeah, that's the point. Now you've hit it. They use more maps than aerial photography and Time Team. I just think that's interesting that I've just spotted that. I'm thinking of Time Team. I'm thinking geophysics every week. You had buildings being constructed by somebody finding a bit of medieval pottery in a field. I remember one episode. Somebody found a ditch and they found a bit of medieval pottery and they reconstructed a building from it, not just the pot. And the field walk, and they used to do lots of that. The excavation, naturally, local information, historical documents, all that stuff. But again, not enough aerial photography. Yeah, interesting. Pam,
probably couldn't afford it.
not on the wages Tony Robinson was on. Go on, Pam.
I've gained tonight, like you say, Time Team was limited, but I've gained on your explanation and understanding. So that's giving me a bit more. So I understand more from what you've explained. And can you spell out gallo and som, just to make sure I've got that right?
Somme, Somme, as in France, and Gallo, Gallo, or Gallic, or Gaulish.
I did have it wrong.
Don't do what my Chinese friend said when he was in an English class. The English teacher said, "What's your favourite magazine?" And he said, "Asterix and the Ghouls." Yeah, and
They do like that.
And to be honest with you, they were very racist, the teachers in school, and they took the mickey out this little Chinese boy, and I feel really sorry for him. But anyway, it's Gauls, not ghouls.
Yeah.
So do you know what? Right. Whenever the technology goes wrong, right, it's always my fault.
Yes.
No, not yes at all. It's not my fault at all. It's not my fault. You know. Oh.
I'm the only man there.
What's that?
You're the only man there. It's got to be your fault.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's true. That's true. Do you know what? The other thing as well is I want you to all extend your technological knowledge, right? As much as I like seeing a blank wall behind Mena, as much as I like seeing a palm behind Jessica, can you all, basically it's quite easy, put an image behind you next week and a friggin' weird llama thing with Mena. Basically, it's easy to do. What you do, you go to where it says stop video and there's an arrow there, what you then do, it says choose virtual background. And then if you've got an image on your computer, you can put a virtual background on.
Oh,
Don't-
stop video.
Don't make the mistake. No, you don't stop the video. There's a little arrow on there, right? You click
Yeah.
the arrow.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see it.
And then you get what?
Then you go to the thing that says virtual background and you find an image off your computer, right? Don't do what somebody did in the week. They chose, we won't go into the image that he had. It was an image of his wife.
Yeah. So you want something archaeological?
But you can't see me now.
No, you gotta fiddle around with the things on there.
Yeah. It's not easy, I don't think.
You just got to fiddle around. Oh my God, right. Jessica, just get back to normal. Go on, and you, Mena. Who the hell is that bloke?
It's from a horror film I watched.
Right.
Oh, I
So-
wanted to say something. I wanted to say something to Pam. Pam,
Yeah.
Julie's gonna have this dog Spot.
Okay.
So I'll show you a picture. You'll understand.
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Well, at least you've moved on from washing machines. I'm impressed. On that note, is anything anyone want to ask me at all, other than somebody dressed up as a bloody shark?
You shouldn't have asked me to change my background, to be honest.
Yeah, I wish I hadn't have bothered now. So, anyone want to ask me anything else before we call it a night?
Yeah. When you do the background, do you have to have something green, like a green piece?
I think you need like a solid background to something like clear. I'm not.
there.
Is that true?
Oh.
No, you don't, because actually behind
Margaret's
me,
got a moon. Margaret's got a moon.
behind me, I've actually got windows and books and stuff.
Right.
So you
So-
don't.
So it's
Oh,
different.
I'll have to have a fiddle.
Yeah, you can have a fiddle as much as you like. On that note, I'm going to call it a night. So anyone wants to chat afterwards can, but I'm going to say now good night to Ellen. Ellen's exhausted. Mena's got weird colour hair. Margaret's had enough of John. I love Beaumaris Castle there. Pam, I will see you next week. And Anne next week. Jessica next week. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you soon.
Good
Night.
night. Good
Thank you.
night. Good
Take
night.
Bye,
Bye for
everybody.
now.
Night.
Oh, Carl might not be here next week. I don't know one way or the other.
Don't worry. I've been thinking about that about John for ages, and whether he's one way or the other. That's fine.
Yeah. I'll come if I can, but I can't promise, okay?
Okay, darling. Thank you for letting me know.
Bye.
Night. Right. So night, Mena as well. So Jessica, what would you like to say?
For the map exercise that we'll be doing in 2 weeks,
Yeah.
I've already been looking into well, it's mostly John Speed's map of Cardiff. So should I prepare some information with that as well?
Yeah, the best thing to do is if you're going to do that, right? Get that map, get the modern map of Cardiff of that area, and then do the John Speed 1622.
I think so. I think it was 1610, the Cardiff one. I'm
Yeah,
not
you're
too
right.
sure.
It is 1610, 1622 for Barry. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so I've been looking into that. I thought it was quite interesting.
No, that's
Right,
good.
I'll see you next week then, Carl.
See you next week.
Take care. Bye.
Take care. See you then.
See you then.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.